Nobody has ever problem solved their way to greatness, but that's exactly what some executive teams are trying to do: optimize their way to growth while their strategy quietly kills it. In today's episode, you'll hear why strategic plans that look the best on paper often lead us further away from real growth, and what you need to do differently before it's too late. Welcome back to the Mike Method, where we dive deeply into what it takes to lead at a high level. Today's guest is someone I've known for over 20 years, Kevin Lawrence. He's a world traveler, truth seeker, and growth advisor to CEOs and executive teams on nearly every continent. He's the author of Your Oxygen Mask First, a key contributor to Scaling Up, and his new book, The Four Forces of Growth, drops this November. In this episode, we go deep on why strategy, not execution, is a silent killer of growth, the dangerous allure of streamlining, and the brutal truth about what happens when CEOs ride the wrong bicycle. Kevin brings clarity, tough love, and real tools to help you avoid what he calls spatial disorientation, the moment when leaders lose sight of which way is up and make the wrong bet while executing it flawlessly. We talk about why the most dangerous quadrant is the one you're probably proud of, the big circle versus the little circle story every exec needs to hear, what happens when loyalty becomes a liability, and how to know whether you're playing pond hockey or actually ready for the NHL. Let's dive in. Kevin, I really appreciate you making time to be here on the podcast.
Thanks. I'm looking forward to it, Mike.
So you've written 2 books before, and you've got a 3rd book coming out November 4th, 2025. And this isn't a book that you wanted to write. This is a book that you had to write. Why?
Yeah, well, first of all, you're right, because writing books is hard. Like, it's really hard, like really, really hard. And this one was particularly hard because basically in the work, in the strategy work and in all the boardrooms that we're in, and when people would call us into new companies, I would see again and again these super smart people working insanely hard, but they weren't getting the results they wanted. And when we go look at their strategic plans were a liability. They were beautiful, thought out. They put huge amounts of effort, days or weeks of human time into it, but the plans were leading them away from growth. They actually sometimes were leading them towards profit, but away from growth. And the founders, the owners, the boards would be frustrated but when you looked at the work they're doing, it was like, well, of course you're not getting the results you want. You're focused on the wrong things, and you're working really, really hard on them, diligently on them, and investing heavily in them, but it's the wrong things. So of course you're not growing like you want.
What's fascinating about that to me is that I think a lot of people would think about execution being the issue. But what I hear you saying is no, like they came up with a strategy and they're actually going and executing upon it. And the reality is it isn't their ability to execute. They're actually working hard to deliver on it. They're delivering on the wrong strategy. And so
yes,
what are the tenets that, like, how do you know as a CEO, how do you prevent that? I guess this is the book, right? So how do we prevent that from happening in the first place?
Well, yeah, it's interesting. And 2 things, like often in companies, a lot of companies do have execution issues. They do. They are not good. They don't have strong focus on tangible goals and accountability and alignment to the stuff that matters the most. So a lot of the organizations that we work with, they're very successful already. They just lose their growth. And so they have decent execution engines. They can always be improved. But what generally happens is as organizations grow, it becomes more complex. There becomes more noise. And there's this concept I learned about from a fighter pilot. Her name's Casey Campbell. And she explained this concept to me, and it was just like, that's it. It's called spatial disorientation. And spatial disorientation.
Okay, got it.
It's a technical term from pilots. I'm not it's awesome. And she tells this story, and when she was flying in the Middle East on a mission, and you know how the fighter jets pull up to the plane and refuel with that little thing they put the filler thing into. They refuel midair, and she's pulling away, and it just happened to be a whole bunch of things at once, but as she's pulling away, she lost her perspective. And she couldn't tell which way was up, and she was totally disoriented. And this is at nighttime, and it was reflections and a number of things. And she explained that she needed to rely on her wing mates or wingmen, I don't know if it's men or women, whatever it happens to be, but the other pilots and people to guide her so she could figure out where she was so she didn't put it into the ground. And what she explained, even, she went on, and I'll keep this non-technical, but one of the major instruments in the middle of the cockpit shows them which direction they're going. And what happens when people get disoriented, everything in the pilot's body tells them what they're doing is correct, but the instruments don't agree with them, so they discount the instrument. They think the instruments are broken because they
Right.
think, because they're disoriented. And when she said there's an analog version of that same instrument down low, so that when people are getting, their brain starts to trick them and they think the digital is messed up, they can go look at the analog instrument, which is always correct. So basically in these moments, and a lot of plane crashes are caused by this. And some famous ones that we've heard about, I don't want to comment on them, but there's some famous ones we've heard of where just the spatial disorientation happens. So in the world of pilots, that's what happens. And in the boardroom, the same thing. In the noise and the chaos and all of the problems and things that are going on, CEOs and executive teams get disoriented, and then they pick a path that actually kills their growth. And so to do it, you need some instruments, which the book gets into one simple instrument. You need an instrument to help you to see and to help remind you of your calibration, and to know whether you're going up or down, whether you're going to grow your business or you're going to optimize your business. And so you need an instrument to see it, and you need to be able to zoom out and see everyone's biases in the room so that you don't get pulled into the groupthink that almost predictably happens in every company.
And so when a CEO discovers that they're in that place, now it puts into question the strategy they've just created with their team, which potentially they're executing upon. So how do they, with the fighter jet, she couldn't just like jump out and right? Like you can't just stop the plane. The plane's flying in the air. You got to deal with the situation while the plane's still flying. Yeah. So what's that like?
Well, you got to understand that you have a problem to start with.
Okay.
And that's the first thing. People are blind to this. People do not see it. Even some of the smartest, best CEOs and executives who work, they don't even realize it, because I'll give you an example. One of our clients did a notable acquisition, and the team was exhausted because they were working so hard to get the acquisition done. They were number one in their market. They bought number two. So they were working so hard to get the deal done. It had been 6 months. The team was drained. We're in the strategic planning session, and everybody is like, we gotta do something for the team. Like we gotta give them a bit of a break. We gotta do some things. And we're talking about, taking care of the culture and taking care of the people and helping them to rejuvenate. And if you would let the team go and make the plan, there would have been all these things that we would have done while we're acquiring this business. The CEO, who is very good at strategic thinking and had the perspective to be able to be zoomed out, he's like, how much to the CFO? How much of a check are we, or how much of a wire are we sending tomorrow for this company? The CFO was like, $20 million. Okay, great. And how much money are we borrowing? $40 million. Okay, so we're signed up for $60 million tomorrow. Okay. And we just bought number two in the business, who they sold against us for 20 years. Okay. Yeah. I think we need to go and meet every customer. I think we need to go and focus on taking care of the customers that we're just spent $60 million for. And we need to find a way with our existing customers who are going to have concerns about this. And basically, in simple terms, is that there is a lot of pain that people are having, and we need to find a way to take care of our people. If we just take care of our people, we have a potential to make a major problem with the $60 million we're spending tomorrow. And so it's to be able to look at all the things and cut through the noise and say, actually, we need to pay attention to the customer. And it's not that we don't take care of our people, but if we just do what logic says, we'll be creating a big problem. And so it
feels like the but, right? Like, oh, well, this just happened. We need to take care of our customers, but we can't, because we have to take the internal team's health check into account. And I think what I hear you saying is there's actually an and. Because actually there's an and for those of you on YouTube floating behind Kevin's head on his shoulder.
Yeah, exactly. There is an and. You're right. It is. But it's interesting if you look at executive teams, the root of it is executives and directors are closer to the problems and the real action in the business. Mm-hmm. And by nature, because they're more metaphorically in the weeds, mm-hmm. they're going to be more likely to make decisions from the weeds. And to make the right strategic decisions, you need to be out of the weeds, because the weeds can be disoriented. So yes. You need to be out of it. And so if the CEO is in the weeds with the executives and directors, they are way more likely to make the wrong decisions.
Right.
The CEO needs to be able to zoom out. And that's why, one of the chapters, I talk about something called like the battle of two bicycles. Because the CEO has a strategic bike to ride, and an operational, unless they have a president or a COO, which a lot don't, or an incredibly strong executive. And even if they do, the strategic bike is about building the business for 3 to 5 years down the road. The operational bike is about performance this day, this week, this month, this quarter, this year. The operational bike pulls you down into the weeds. And if the CEO, at a minimum, we found through this, is that the CEOs can't ride two bikes at once. It's very, very hard, and they end up dropping one. Super strategic CEOs drop the operational bike and or delegate the operational bike. And super operational CEOs often drop the strategic bike. And so somehow they have to have enough time. If they don't have half of their time on that strategic bike, they're more likely to not be zoomed out and more likely to make tactical decisions that make sense in the context of the weeds, but strategically don't make sense in context of growth.
Tactical decisions that make sense in the context of the weeds, strategic decisions that don't make sense relative to growth. So they need to basically understand which bike they're on. And I guess, it comes down to their calendar.
Yes.
I have spoken to so many CEOs in the context or executives in the context of leadership development and said to them, let's look at your calendar. Like, are you just in back-to-back meetings? Like when is your white space to have time to sit back and think strategically? Because the meetings you're in are mostly operational in nature. Maybe some of them are strategic, but let's say overall they're probably operational. And so if your calendar doesn't have white space in it, right away, I know that leader is mostly going to be on the wrong bike most of the time.
Yes. And yes, at a macro, and we get them to look at their calendar and we get them to look at, like in the book, we get into this principles of the 4 forces of growth, which is modeled after the 4 forces of flight. It's the same thing, makes an airplane fly, makes a business grow. And we get them to figure out and plot their calendar from the different quadrants, how much of the time is in each of the different quadrants. And whether it's scheduled or white space in a given month, how much of their time are they spending in growth? And so the quadrants there's the growth quadrant, there's an improvement quadrant where you're optimizing and streamlining, where executives do their best work. And that's where you create short-term value and profitability and efficiency and happy customers, which is very different than growth. And the root of it is that people mistakenly think they can improve their way to growth or they can optimize their way to growth. Growth is a completely different set of activities than improvement. Growth drives the core unit of the business. It gets more customers, more widgets, more volume, whatever it happens to be, new products, services, markets, whatever. And improvement takes those opportunities and delivers on them really, really well. But what happens over time is that people end up believing, because they're surrounded by problems and surrounded by things that can be optimized, people get stuck into the misinformed belief that if they just focus on continually improving things and doing great, that the company will grow. And that's almost never true.
I think it's you that said this. And so I think I've been quoting you correctly. And if it isn't, maybe you can correct me.
Sure.
What comes up for me is this quote that I think I heard from you, which is that nobody has ever problem solved their way to greatness before.
I've said that may or may not be, but it doesn't work. Actually, the best growth CEOs know that they need to leave a majority of the problems alone. So one of the top growth CEOs that we work with, a lot of great growth CEOs. One, and he was part of the inspiration for the book. His name's BP, Brent Parent. He's on the East Coast of the US. And there's a story in the book about this. And when I first met him, I didn't know him at all. I mean, I talked to him on the phone for a few minutes, and then we went and did some work with his team. But we're in our first meeting, and one of his executives is talking about one of the challenges in the business. And he goes, "Tommy, are you in the big circle or the little circle?" And Tommy's like, he looks down at his shoes. "Oh, I think I'm in the little circle, BP." He goes, "Okay, Tommy, why don't you give us a little lesson on circles?" Okay. And so Tommy gets up on the whiteboard and he draws the big circle. And then he draws a little circle. Okay. So Tommy, how much of our time do we spend in the big circle? He goes, "BP, it's 95%. Thanks, Tommy. Tommy, write it down. So he writes 95 in the circle. How much in the other circle? Well, there's 5 left. We spend 5. Okay, great. Tommy, what's the big circle? That's opportunities. Great. What happens in opportunities, Tommy? We go help more customers and we sell them more products, services, solutions, things that take care of their problems and make them happy with us. Okay, great. Tommy, what happens in a little circle? Well, we solve problems. We deal with problems. Great. And so it goes on to tell the story about big circle is opportunities, little circle is problems. And the problems are always there. But generally, as companies grow, you can spend, and a lot of people do, 99% of your time in the little circle. Internally, solving problems, getting pats on the back, getting accolades, getting high, best place to work, supplier of the year, huge customer NPS, record profitability, amazing efficiency. All of those good things can happen in the little circle of solving problems and streamlining things, but then you stop growing. And so the story goes on, and BP, and he's a wicked guy. He goes on, and hey guys, by the way, if you've got problems you want help with, hey, come to my office between like 8 and 8:30 any day you want. He comes in at 9. Yeah, true story. He says, and if you've got a customer and you got a big problem you want to solve, or an amazing solution you want to present, or something to help close a sale, open a market, bring on a product line, you call me 24/7 and I'll answer.
Yeah.
And I mean, we took and built that company the first time around, and sold it for over $1 billion in Canadian currency. And then the new owners didn't quite understand how to optimize it, so we bought back a piece, the core piece of it that he started with, and we're gonna do it again. So we got the band back together to do it again. But it's the root of this is that it's so hard to stay focused on opportunities. Mm-hmm. And in the context of the book, it's new customers, new subscribers, new whatever your core, I call the core X of the business, the core unit, the core widget. And people end up getting stuck into more of, instead of business development, it's account management. Managing and people need to do that. Like, that's all good. Mm-hmm. But you can't account manage your way to your growth aspirations unless you want to grow 1% a year. And by the way, 1% is less than inflation, so you're going backwards. And you can grow more than 1% by just internal focus, but it doesn't get you. It doesn't get you there long term. But it becomes a natural thing because there's so many problems. There's so much little circle work to do that people get sucked into it. And by the way, the problems scream at you, and you get awards and accolades when you solve them, both intrinsically. Yeah. It is. I call it in the book the seduction of streamlining.
Oh, the seduction of streamlining. That's beautiful. I love that phrase.
And I'm not judging the people that do this. It's normal. When you're surrounded by problems and you feel like you need to play whack-a-mole, like often you should. And some jobs require that, but that's not the path to growth that we need to get to. And if I go back to, and some of the best growth companies we've had, let's just say they'd have a EBITDA margin of 12%. Many of those models, they could run at 14 or 15% EBITDA margin. But we often, in some cases, will let them run a little bit loose so we can keep focused and focused on growth. We can keep more resources focused on growth, less on the problems. We're still solving stuff, but we don't squeeze everything out of the model. Let it run a little loose, not perfect, but put more energy on growth. Otherwise, if we waited to grow until everything was fixed, we'd never grow the way we want.
I was in a boardroom with an executive team 2 weeks ago, and they were talking about these significant challenges and problems they were facing as a direct relation to the growth they'd experienced. And I said to them, you've finally earned the right to have those problems. And they said, what do you mean we've earned the right to have these problems? Like, you didn't have the right to have these problems. You were too small before. Yeah. But now you've grown to the level where problems like this occur. And that is, you've earned that. You've earned the problems that are occurring.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, the problems of growth are wonderfully earned problems.
Yeah, because if you're small or you don't grow, you don't face those problems. And I said, now that you've got problems this size, be grateful that you have these problems, because it's a direct reflection of the success that your organization is having. Now, some of them you need to solve for, and some of them are, honestly, solving them is not going to move the dial at all. And you almost have to accept that these are inherent in a business this complex at this scale.
Yes, a growth company, growth is messy. Messy. Behind the scenes of growth companies is duct tape and like baling wire that they use on farms. It's not it's not perfect. It's good, but it's not. But when you get more perfectionist type, and you need high standards, but growth fights perfection, and it's really, really hard for some people. And then when it does come, and there are problems you need to address, but you need discernment and data to know which ones to solve and which ones not to. So we were in a strat planning meeting, like you were describing, in a boardroom, and someone's like, our biggest customer is asking us for a 5% volume rebate. And the customer was 20 million of revenue in this particular client. This is one of the other stories in the book. And so it was like, okay, that's a big deal.
$1 million.
$1 million. Yeah, okay. Yeah. Well, that could easily derail. And this is at a time when I think the business might have been making $3 or $5 million.
So
it was a notable
perspective. It's significant.
It's significant. And so, but we had really good data. The CFO goes, Yeah, we have our profitability by customer report. This is our worst customer from a profitability perspective. And conceptually, it's like, we make 500 grand a year on this customer total because the margin on this one isn't great. I got the number. Yeah, the margin isn't great. So we can tell them to pound sand. Let's get back to work. It's like we spent about 30 to maybe 3 minutes maximum on what would have derailed a lot of companies because we had the data to know that this issue almost isn't worth talking about because they're a low margin customer and we can't give them the rebate. We'd go from making 500 grand conceptually to losing $1.5 million, or sorry, to
losing
losing $500,000.
Yeah.
But we had the data to not go down a rabbit hole that we shouldn't waste more than a couple minutes on. That's hard with problems. If you're not good at math, if you're not good at math, you will solve the wrong. No, seriously, you need to run math on strategy. Strategy is math. It is. It's not words. And people get lost in it sometimes with all these words and blah, blah, blah. Well, no, at the end of the day, the words are supposed to translate to numbers, and numbers drive a P&L or a balance sheet.
So you described a 4-quadrant model, and you've talked about 2 of the quadrants so far. Remind me about the 2 quadrants now. So one is growth.
Yeah, for sure. So the model is to following the 4 forces of flight.
Yeah. Okay.
And what makes a plane fly, what makes a plane go up is the lift of the wings.
Yes.
And the thrust of the engine pushes it forward. Those two create altitude. In the model, growth is when you are focused on opportunities and then you have courage to push ahead into unknown or risky potential things. That's where growth comes. You've got opportunity focus and you got courage. The opposite of that, down in the bottom of the model, just a basic, $4, is problems. So opportunities fight with problems all the time. And problems are what pull you down, like Tommy was looking at his shoes. And you have courage to solve problems, you get improvement, right? And you improve your margins, your efficiency, your satisfaction, your profitability. You get bonuses. But that's all stuff that needs to be there. And that has to be strong, but it enables growth. It doesn't drive. If you go back up to opportunities and then you go backwards from, instead of courage, you have fear. Right? Because courage and fear is that other axis. Right. So if you've got opportunities and you're fearful, you get analysis. You're just going to sit and analyze and think, and you need some of that in a company to be successful, for sure. But if you get locked into that quadrant, you're just looking at things you could do, analyzing them, and doing nothing. But again, you need by the way, you need a mix of all of this to be successful. And then down, if you're back on the back part of the matrix in fear, and then you go back down to problems, you get agony. And in that place of agony, you're looking at your problems and you're so fearful, but again, nothing happens. So we're all smart enough to know that the back half of the matrix, when you're driven by fear, like we're smart enough to generally know that'll be a problem. But the most dangerous quadrant of them all, we know agony is bad. We know overanalysis is bad, and we might be over-indexed, but that normally doesn't kill businesses or kill growth. And if it does, it happens pretty fast because it almost falls out of the sky. The most dangerous one, which people aren't aware of, is the improvement quadrant. Because all the awards, all the accolades, our ego is happy, our shareholders are happy in the short term, but it robs you from long-term growth. So by nature, as a company grows and scales, just like you talked about the problems of growth with that client, organizations often, the resources tend to gravitate down lower and backwards into the improvement quadrant. They tend to drop down. And in order for an organization to consistently grow, they got to keep enough resources allocated to growth. And growth driving, again, the core units. Starts with the CEO. You got to look through your strategic plan. What is the organization focusing on and communicating? And if you don't and you're unaware, and all you got to do is, like, literally, CEO, check your calendar. What percentage of your resources are focused on future growth of the company, of your meetings, of your time? And then pull out your strategic plan. Look at your 3-year or whatever your long midterm plan is. What percentage of your objectives directly drive growth? Not, well, strategically it'll help us. No. That directly would be allocated to that growth quadrant, and simple, oversimplified math. But if you want your organization to grow 20% a year, you probably need realistically at least 20 to 25% of your strategic plan to be focused in that quadrant, maybe 30. Oversimplified. But go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, this is incredible insights, Kevin. Mike,
it's embarrassing. It's embarrassingly simple. And when we go into companies again, and I can walk you through 25 case studies of, these are companies that, they would have scaled. Like, a lot of our clients are mid-market. They'd be doing 100, 200, 300 million in revenue, and like enduring companies, been around a long time. and you look at your strategic plan, it's like we had one, it's like just under 200 million of revenue, great company. And I was talking to the CEO, and they're saying, yeah, things are good. Our growth is kind of slow, but it's okay. It's decent. I said, okay. What was your growth? And but they just had record profitability. They were celebrating record profit, which is wonderful. And I said, well, tell me about how was your overall growth? Well, we grew top line last year about 4%. I said, okay, that's concerning. Yeah. I said, did you do any price increases last year? Yeah, about 5%. Okay. And you grew 4. And so we started digging in, and we started digging, although they're celebrating, and I did feel a little bit bad but we're digging in, and it found actually at a unit level, at a core unit level, they shrunk 3%. And then when we dug into, okay, and most people, by the way, and in the book I talk about what I call real growth. Real growth is unit level growth and sustaining or ideally increasing your profit per unit or your profit per X. So more X's is real growth, as long as you're sustaining the profit. And those two things, that's the real measure. Revenue is deceiving. Profitability is deceiving. Margin growth is also deceiving. So core unit and then profit or gross profit per unit. When we went and looked at it from that perspective, as I mentioned, the core unit had dropped, although the profit per unit was better. And I said, okay, well, let's go take a look at your sales team. Like, why are your units dropping? And when we went through and looked at it, there was no focus on new units. It was all optimizing existing customers. So they had stopped doing business development essentially for new customers. The head of sales was playing office. They were in the office all the time. If your head of sales is in the office all the time, you're in trouble.
Right.
You're probably going to lose your growth. So it's getting people to, and they didn't have any awareness. They were so focused on profitability, they didn't realize the actual machine was shrinking.
It's interesting that you simplify it like that. I know you say it's overly simplistic, but I think that for people to be able to ground themselves in their own business, the model has to be simple. I think the challenge of a lot of business models, particularly if the business books are written out of one of the universities, tend to have, I'm going to just say it, what I would refer to as intellectual wankery. Like there's just too much terms.
I see it all the time.
And the thing is, it's not usable. Whereas like you and I live in the day-to-day reality of talking to actual CEOs and executives about their leaders, about their strategies. And we have this unique view of being given the keys and the access to look inside. And so we both know that many of these theories and these strategic models and everything else, they look great on paper. Boards of directors love them because they're so
people feel so.
So
and I generally, one of my clients spent $250,000 on one of those intellectual pieces of work.
Yeah.
We basically had to throw it in the garbage because it was what I call kitchen sink thinking. We're going to do everything and we're going to do a lot of it. And it wasn't executable. It was too complicated. Like one of my favorite quotes, it's the source. I attribute it to Mark Twain, and I think that's not the right source, but it's called, I would have written a shorter letter, but I didn't have the time.
Right.
And that's true. But like I've been doing this strategy stuff for 30 years. Right. And the thing, like I would suggest almost impossible to replicate an experience, because having written his books is interesting, but I've been in boardrooms around the world and we work with clients long term.
Yes.
So I'm in the room when we make the strategic choices, and every quarter we see how it worked or didn't, and we keep iterating. And you look 5, 7, 10 years down the road, you actually see what works and what doesn't. And you learn from thousands of mistakes, thousands of them. And when you go and boil it down, like if you can't boil down a strategic plan into 3, 4, 5 numbers and really look at it, then you don't have it. You're just guessing. And it's hard, right? I mean, we do this for a living. I've done it thousands of times, so it's really simple. But out of respect for the people doing the work, they get spatially disoriented. They get caught up in all these, everyone that joins brings a new strategic framework and they cobble it all together into these super complex things. And sometimes it's simple, but then it's simplistic. And if they just did this, they built a table going back 10 years of our X growth, our core unit growth, and our profit or gross profit for each of those units. And they looked at it and then they projected where it wants to be in 3, 5, 10 years, whatever they want to focus on. And then they build the strategies around that kind of growth, or at least with a filter of that growth, they're going to be way better off. Because in the middle of it, and strategic plan is hard. Strategy is hard, especially if you don't do it every day. People get caught up and pulled in all these different directions. You got to boil it. So in the book, I got to explain the model, how people get it, but it's really, X and profit per X is real growth, understanding that in your business and getting dialed in. Strategic tools like Jim Collins's flywheel, which is a beautiful, beautiful thing. And then getting the team really aligned around what I call it just 3 big moves. Like at the end of the day, for our growth strategy for our 3 years to or 4 years to double our business, basically at an X level and a profit level, what are the 3 big things that we're going to focus on? And what's the number in behind each of those that tells us it's working and worth it? I can go on about this stuff forever. I get excited about this stuff, but it's like if you can't make it that simple, then you got work to do, because that means you probably either you don't understand it or you haven't found the way to boil it down yet.
I echo everything you just said. Anytime I've heard somebody say to me, it's a very complex strategy, I'm like, oh, God, you don't understand it then.
I haven't found a complex business in my life. I found hard business. I haven't found a complex. Yeah, but we're on the outside. We're zoomed out, so it is easier, right? And
it's true, because we're looking.
I've seen hundreds of different business models and dynamics and stuff. That's the advantage of being later in a career and having more experience, is you've seen it all. No, I've seen a lot. I'm still learning like crazy, and know I have a lot more to learn, like especially around new technologies and AI and things. But the benefit of mastery is if things become really simple. I think it's almost impossible to not scale a business. Like if you understand the simplicity and the core of the model, and that's what this book is about. Like if you do this and you follow this, it's next to impossible to not get where you want, assuming you've got some sort of decent competitive advantage, and there's a market for what you want to do. It's kind of like it's in most businesses, unless you're riding a downward trend, people don't scale because they aren't putting energy into the right things, and they miss it. Or on the people side, they're not willing to make some tough calls. And they're dragging talent. And if you're dragging talent, or what I call having part-time jobs, if you got too many part-time jobs as a leader, you're going to be ineffective, and your part of the business won't do well.
I think the problems, people trying to problem solve their way to greatness and not having any players on their team. If you're doing those 2 things, any strategy you create is, it's just not going to work. Yeah, it's not going to work.
Or it's going to be so hard and exhausting. And that's the thing. It becomes, people make the game harder than it needs to be. And unfortunately, sometimes there's got to be some short-term pain to be able to do it. And that's, we put a lot of energy onto the building of really strong teams. That's why I'm grateful for the work that you do around the development, because at the end of the day, I remember we were session with Jim Collins once, and he said, you can't build a great company with good people. It doesn't work.
You can't build a great company with good people.
No. And that's why one of the chapters in the 4 Forces of Growth, which is the working title, it may or may not be the final title, the new book, is called, I call it the problem of pond hockey. So in Canada, growing up, there's this thing, where I lived, we played street hockey. But in the prairies in the center of Canada and to the east, they play pond hockey, where it's just when the pond freezes, kids go out and scrape it, or dad helps them scrape it. And then all the kids from the area come out with their sticks and their gear, and they play hockey, and you divide the team up into 2 different teams. And whoever's there plays. Fortunately, some of those people go on to become CEOs and leaders, and they take that same pond hockey strategy with them when they want to play at the higher level. And they're like, hey, you're here, so you get to be on the team. And one of the things that we work with companies on is to have more of a NHL mentality. The National Hockey League, for those that know hockey, it's like, well, pond hockey rules don't apply to NHL. It's not because you're here you play. It's because you played great, you get to play. And oh, it was my dog's barking. My dog's, but so many CEOs, especially founders, are stuck in pond hockey thinking. And I get it, out of loyalty, they want to work with those people. They want to keep them on their team. Another phrase I have is the loyalty liability. But at some point, one, it hurts the people because they're getting dragged everywhere. Or it hurts the people around them because the person doesn't perform, because not everybody makes it to the NHL. And it's not that you got to be at that level, but as your company grows, the talent needs to be better and better and stronger to handle a bigger, more complex business. But a lot of people are still trying to play with whoever showed up. And that's the hardest part about this work, because that loyalty is awesome. It just becomes really painful for the organization if they don't deal with the situations they need to deal with.
Yeah, it's not Reed Hastings, forget the gentleman's name now, the CEO of Netflix.
Hoffman.
So they wrote Hoffman, Reed Hoffman. So they created the
is that right?
They created the book, the Netflix book. And one of the key philosophies at Netflix is that we are not a family. And what they say is we're a professional sports team, and we want to hire A players We're going to pay you like an A player. You need to perform like an A player. And if you don't, we're going to trade you. And that's just the way it is. And his belief and what they've seen is that loyalty and acting like a family will 100% ensure that you get overall average performance. And the challenge with that, of course, is that your A players are looking at the C players and thinking, why are they here? Why am I working so hard?
Why am I working so hard?
Yeah.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. Now, with your average players, maybe they have a chance of becoming an A player or superstar, but only if you put the time and energy in to develop them. But you better not have a lot of them because, again, as you say, like if you have average players, you're going to get average results. Now, I will say that if you have above average players and an incredible team mentality and an incredible culture, you're probably going to beat a handful of A players in another company that can't work.
But assuming that you build an aligned team that works well together, talent matters. And there's so many people that end up in roles they should not be in, whether it's over promoted or put into an area where they're just not able to thrive, or they can't work with the leader of that area. Like getting the people decisions right is so critical, and it's not always these people's fault. That's why when it doesn't work out, you want to be as graceful and respectful as you can in the situation, because it's like sometimes it just doesn't work. But I like what you're saying there, Mike, is that the thing is, and that's why for a lot of founders, they treat it like a family, and they even have things in the culture like we're a family, we take care of each other, which we want to try and keep that. But it's like, how do you do that and go from just pure loyalty to loyalty combined with loyalty to performance? Right. And that's the shift, is loyal to performance.
Yes.
And that's hard for people. And it's a growth curve that everyone goes to. And if people stay just in pure loyalty, the business, it won't get there. And by the way, we're not saying you want to be like a big cold corporation that doesn't care. You just need to create more of instead of a pond hockey culture, you want to create more of a performance culture. And that's, for a lot of people, that's a shift, and a hard shift. But if you want to play in the NHL, you got to, as one of our clients, he says, if you want to play in the show, you can't have dead weight in the ice. And the show being the NHL, you can't have dead weight on the ice.
I love that. Do you want to play?
And would I want to be a pond hockey or NHL? Right? It's like,
Kevin, I think that's the perfect place to wrap this up. Like, do you want to play pond hockey? Is that what you want to play, or do you want to play in the NHL? Man, that's awesome. Thank you so much for making time to be on the pod today.
Yeah, it's awesome, Mike. Great conversation. I love talking about these things. And, like you, I have lots of experiences over the years that I love to share and keep learning as well, because I don't want to think I have it all figured out.
November 4th.
I don't want to turn into a pond hockey player myself.
No, me neither. Thank you, my friend.
Thanks.